Listen to podcasts of Joe Walsh and Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. About 2 decades ago, physics professor at NYU, Alan Sokol, did a bit of a sting with respect to all of these academic journals submitting basically fictional research work and seeing if it would get published, to expose the lack of intellectual rigor with some of these journals and some of these intellectuals that are otherwise given great deference because of their credentials. We talked about this last quarter of last year. A group of academics did the same thing. What they did is submitted papers under the grievance studies rubric to have the same, to make the same exposures, or at least to test to see if there is rigor with respect to these journals in assessing the quality of the research that's submitted for publication. For example, and I mean also if anybody's even reading anything, or if they are, what is going through their minds. One article that was submitted to an academic journal by this group of academics, essentially operating as undercover intellectual agents, if you will. Human reactions to rape culture and queer performativity at urban dog parks in Portland, Oregon. As a couple of academics who wrote on behalf of Peter Boghossian, who's a professor at Portland State University, said of Dog Park, "That was by far the silliest of our papers, which was a point we always intended to reveal in full to the public once our audit was completed. In it, we claimed, extremely implausibly, to have examined 10,000 dogs' genitals before interrogating their owners about their sexual orientations." The response is as absurd as the premise of the paper. Some academics, they report, claiming that the problem with the paper isn't that we didn't is that we didn't actually examine the dog's genitals by the thousands. The only problem they have with the topic is the lack of legitimate data, that they didn't do the work, if you will. It's remarkable. So you would think exposing fraud, right? If you're propagating fraud through your own lack of due diligence, that's exposing fraud. These people who make decisions, publication decisions for these academic journals, particularly this whole research area of grievance studies. You think you'd be rewarded for that. People would be shamed. There'd be some accountability. There'd be new protocols put in place, especially since we've been here before, like with the Sokol incident, as I mentioned. And if you think that, you think whistleblowers or undercover academics interested in the integrity of academic journals, if you think they'd be rewarded, that's where you'd be wrong. The aforesaid Peter Boghossian is being disciplined by Portland State University, and at least as of the writing of this article I read on the topic, he potentially faces termination. He is a professor of critical thinking, science, and pseudoscience, and the philosophy of education and atheism at Portland State University. Peter Boghossian, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me on. Good morning, Chicago.
Good morning. So did I fairly summarize this whole timeline of what you and your colleagues did and where you currently stand?
Yeah, you did a pretty good job. So there are a lot of moving parts to this. So
yeah.
We saw a problem in the academy, and we tried to talk to folks about it, but they were entrenched in this dogma, which really has a strong ideological grip on the academy, and it's starting to spill out into the academy. We saw a problem with scholarship that wasn't rigorous and that was corrupted. So we wrote 20 papers in a year, James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose, and I, each one more preposterous, more asinine, and more ludicrous than the next.
Stiff competition. And whoever came up with Dog Park, clearly the winner.
Oh, thanks. Well, it was all of us as a team effort, but I go to the I go to the dog park every day. It is true that that was a very, very silly and ludicrous paper, but really the other papers, a fat bodybuilding, that there should be a space in traditional bodybuilding for morbidly obese people to come in. That was one that I don't know. I don't know how much I can say on the air, but that men should self-penetrate and experience that with their girlfriends, so they'll be less transphobic. That was one. But there were others that were all ludicrous about, a gender scholar goes to Hooters and the dialogue in that. Was
I like the fat bodybuilder thing because it reminds me of Chris Farley and Patrick Swayze on Saturday Night Live when they're both Chippendales dancers. We've actually come to that as like legitimate academic exploration now. That used to be just a bit on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, and it's a shame because that's eroding the confidence and the trust in our academic institutions, right? So we'd like to have a place or a canon of literature, a body of knowledge where we can say, hey, we know this. And how do we know this? We know this because it was studied and people tried to falsify it, and it's just, it's a scientific method. But those mechanisms aren't in place in these journals. And as a consequence of this, people really have eroded have their trust eroded in public institutions.
And so you've been brought before some star chamber at Portland State University for crimes against academia. Explain?
Professional misconduct, yeah. So I was found guilty of not seeking IRB approval. IRB is basically human subjects whenever you want to use human subjects. So even though there were no dogs, we didn't actually obviously look at any dog's genitals and interrogate their owners as to their sexual orientation, but the IRB was claiming that the reviewers of the journal are the human subjects. But I want to say that I actually sympathize with the administration situation. I don't know what kind of pressure they're under behind the scenes, but there was an anonymous public letter by I think 10 or 11 or 12 of my colleagues. They wouldn't even sign their name to it. It's basically a hit piece in the school newspaper. Mm-hmm. And I think if that's anything to go by, it's significant. So PSU really does need to make a decision, right? So they either need to use their institute of power to support me and the pursuit of truth, right? Because these folks have placed an agenda before the truth, an ideological and political agenda, or they side with the grievance studies bullies and the people who are pressing them behind the scenes.
Well, and so you said you've been found guilty. So you're facing termination, as I understand it. Is that a possibility?
That can be. Look, fabrication of data is a very, very serious academic offense, as is plagiarism. We plagiarized Mein Kampf, Hitler's book.
Well, right. But I mean, right.
I'll cop to that one. I'm guilty to that. So, we plagiarized Mein Kampf and rewrote it as a feminist text.
Right.
But these are very, very serious charges.
Yeah.
No, I probably shouldn't be laughing, but it is really serious. I could face potential termination.
Well, it's serious because it's just through the looking glass. This is crazy, and I know some of your supporters too. I mean, this is not you mentioned ideology at the beginning, the ideology of the grievance studies folks. This is not like left-right ideology. I noticed that people supporting you include, the noted atheist Richard Dawkins has written a letter on your behalf.
Yeah, well, I'm an atheist too, so I don't.
Well, okay, well there you go. Even more to my point.
Yeah, so here's what's really interesting. Letters of support from everybody. It's so amazing. Students, academics, high-profile intellectuals, they're just flooding into PSU, and I really can't keep up. So these folks fully support our grievance studies probe because they're just fed up with this corruption of scholarship. And they're sick of university administrators supporting this cadre of bullies who operate in these disciplines. So they're saying enough is enough. And the interesting thing is that they're now putting their names on these letters, so they're not scared anymore. These people have bullied everyone in calling them racist, alt-right, Nazi, homophobe, sexist, misogynist, and people are tired of it. I'm tired of it.
Do you think that incidents like yours, but even the evolution of this, the sort of the mugging of Brett Weinstein at Evergreen State, Brett Weinstein, Jonathan Haidt, some of these other people that are getting together who are not, conservatives like me, but they believe in academic freedom and the integrity of the education and the scholarship. Do you think that is actually turning the tide at all on college campuses?
That's a very, very difficult question. I don't know. Brett's a very good friend of mine, and I just had drinks with him the other night. I don't know the answer to that question. We've talked about that extensively. I do want to say it is irrelevant to me that you are a conservative and I am a liberal.
Yeah.
You have conservative views, and any views that don't adhere to the dominant moral orthodoxy aren't welcome on campus anymore. And I want to hear your views, and I want to engage you publicly, and I want students to engage those views as well. And what we're seeing happen right now is that there is a dominant moral orthodoxy on university campuses. And if anybody doesn't toe the party line, they can't ask questions. And so conservatives are then losing trust in the university system, right?
Yes.
Liberals and conservatives who are there feel isolated and marginalized. And that's exactly the opposite of the way they should feel, because we should have a diversity of thought. So that's not what these folks are talking about when they throw out the word diversity and safe spaces and trigger warnings. So the other problem with that is that liberals, people who hold liberal views, and I want to say one more thing, people who hold liberal views, they don't get their views challenged. They only hear one side of the issue. So they become brittle in their ways of dealing with things. So they, cry, or they're offended, or they call you names, or they run away, but they don't engage the arguments, right?
Yeah, and it would seem to me that an additional problem, too, that's maybe underappreciated, get your reaction, is you're going to lose great intellectuals because they're not going to want to be in environments like this where you can be fired or have to go through this ordeal that you're going through because you're trying to properly expose less than quality scholarship.
That's correct. And I think it's really important to know that it doesn't matter what side of the aisle the scholarship is coming from. Like, phonology, the bumps on the head thing, when people used to believe that you can make inferences about someone's intelligence and personality from bumps on the head, studying bumps on the head. So if a bunch of liberals get together and they start propagating this ridiculous, belief system of phrenology, if I say, hey, wait a minute, there's not enough evidence for that, that doesn't make me a conservative. That just makes me a guy who thinks there's not enough evidence for phrenology, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what we have now is we have entire disciplines that have been corrupted academically. And as you mentioned, as Brett said, he calls it idea laundering. This is just the perfect description. So a bunch of people get together. They have these strong moral impulses, like they really feel something. They don't know what to do about it. So they start journals and they launder their ideas. It starts as an idea, they put it through a peer-reviewed journal, and on the other side it comes out knowledge. Then they take those papers that come out, and they not only do they teach kids in class, our college kids, but when they're asked how they know something, unlike the Christian who says, well, I know it, I have my faith, these people point to their canon of scholarship. Well, this is how we know. But the problem is that those canons of scholarship are corrupted. Those papers are illegitimate. And what we did is we delegitimized those canons by showing that they're just preposterous.
Idea laundering. I do like that a lot. I think that's a great description of what's happening. He's Dr. Peter Boghossian. You're an evolutionary biologist, yes?
No, I teach philosophy at Portland State University at the moment. I teach philosophy at Portland State University.
Okay, at the moment. Professor of critical thinking philosophy at Portland State University, and also too, were you an elected official in Oregon?
Yeah, I was a councilman for the state libraries, and I served on the prison advisory committee. I did my dissertation and then on how to improve the critical thinking and moral reasoning of prison inmates, and then I later ran for little local office, or I don't even know if office is the right word, but a position here at Columbia River Correctional Institution.
No, interesting. Okay. All right. Well, good luck to you with respect to the disciplinary action you're facing at Portland State. We'll be following your story. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
He joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
You've made the switch, and it feels so good. You've switched to Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.